Hi everyone, my name is Erin Sawyer, and today I'm going to be presenting on causal comparative research, which comes from chapter 10 of our textbook. So this presentation is going to walk us through what causal comparative research is, where we see it in education, of why it is both useful and challenging. So let's jump right in. So you might be wondering, what are we even talking about? So causal comparative research is a kind of like detective work in education. So we start by observing something that already has happened. So this could be something like a difference in test scores between two different groups. And then we are going to try to figure out why these differences might exist. So there's a key idea here. The key idea is that we are not changing anything on purpose. We are just observing real life differences. So another example of this would be that we notice students who ride the bus are often late to school. A researcher might look into whether or not transportation type influences attendance. We can't just randomly assign students to live farther away just for this particular research study. So we are studying reality instead. And you might be thinking, why do we use it? So schools are full of differences, and there's some things that we cannot change or should not control. So one of these is we cannot change a student's family income. We can't assign a student to have a disability, or we can't choose a student to have an anxious personality. But what we can do is study how these factors relate to learning outcomes. So this design allows researchers to investigate important questions that would otherwise be unethical to manipulate in an experiment. So to conduct a causal comparative study, we first must select two or more groups that already have a difference. The second thing is we have to measure an outcome to compare them. And the third thing is try to determine what might have caused these differences. So an example is, do students in music programs have better math scores than those who aren't? In this, we are comparing, not inferring that this is what's true or what is actually the case. So, one quick thing to think about is, what's one school related factor that you think affects achievement? So, this could be sports, sleep, lunch, technology. So, this is how all of these studies start, just thinking about simple things like this. So, common types of questions. So, research questions typically fall into these categories, like organismic, which is age, gender, and ethnicity; ability, which would be reading level and IQ; personality, which would be motivation or anxiety; family, this could be parental involvement or socioeconomic status; and then school. So this would be class size, school type, and something like access to preschool. So these are really big influences, and causal comparative research helps us understand them a lot better. So on the right, we kind of just go more into what we talked about in the previous slide. So this brings us to retrospective and prospective approaches to causal comparative research. So there are two directions that this study can travel in. So the first would be retrospective, excuse me. This means looks back in time. So we start with a current outcome like a behavior problem and explore past experiences like preschool attendance. And then prospective is looking forward in time. So we begin with the groups first, like students placed in a gifted program. And then we follow them to see long term effects. So most education studies are retrospective because schools keep a lot of past records. So I want you to kind of think for a second, which one sounds like it would be easier? I'll just give you like 5 seconds to think. So I would probably say retrospective because the data actually exists there. So this is why most education studies would be retrospective. So, this is why it's not an experiment. So, causal comparative is not the same thing as experimental research. So, with experimental research, the researcher can control the variables, which they cannot do in causal comparative. They can choose random assignments, which you cannot do in causal comparative. And there's no proof that there is causation. Like, we cannot provide that. With experimental research, there is a much stronger claim. So instead of saying this caused that, we would say this might be related to that. It's an important first step, but we are not giving a final answer with causal comparative research. So now we would be going into grouping variables. So these studies are based on groups which are formed by different things. This could be nature, like age and disability; society, which would be social economic status; language or background; it could be life experiences, which would be preschool attendance or other factors; and then the last thing would be school, which would be teacher style, class size, etc. So some variables could be manipulated, like teaching style, but not realistically in a controlled experiment across many schools. We can't say, sorry kids, we're flipping a coin to decide who gets technology this year. That just would not work. So, control procedures. A major challenge is making fair comparisons because groups often differ in more than one way. So, to reduce unfair differences, researchers might use matching. So, this would be pairing similar students together, or using homogeneous subgroups. This would be analyzing similar categories separately. And then we could also adjust for prior differences statistically beforehand. But even with these tools, we still have to be very careful about claiming a cause. So there are some challenges to this type of research. So there are three big issues to remember. So the first one is confounding variables. So an example of this would be technology access might be linked to wealth. So which one of them affects learning? Is it the wealth or is it the access to technology? The second thing is cause and effect confusion. So, did anxiety cause low performance, or did low performance cause the anxiety in the student? And the last would be timing. So, which factor happened first? Because of these problems, this research gives us a strong clue, but not a final answer to what we are studying. So, the end of this chapter gives us a real life example. So, the study that they give us um, studied students who attended full day kindergarten versus half day kindergarten. So they followed these students over multiple years to see how well they performed academically. So, why is this causal comparative? So, we cannot assign kids to these programs. Districts and families choose which programs they put their child in. So, over time, the full day students performed better academically in general than the students who only attended half day. So there is also more instructional time, but does this equal more learning? It could possibly mean that, but we also have to consider other factors. So other factors could include parental involvement, school funding, or even student readiness in general. So the research doesn't exactly close the case, but it helps build an argument that full day kindergarten may be more beneficial than attending half day. So this type of evidence is exactly what policymakers use when they're deciding whether or not to expand full day programs. So Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, this research is extremely powerful because even with limitations, it focuses on real students, real classrooms, and real experiences. So, this helps us identify where to improve education and who best needs support, even if they can't give us every answer. So, that is my presentation on chapter 10, and I hope you learned something new and enjoyed. And my references are listed right here on my last slide. Thank you.